It looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind. It either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
What are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Zia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
This is Susie from Southern California. You are listening to my favorite show, Sasquatch Chronicles.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you. We're going to be chatting with Mike, and Mike comes to us from California, and back in 1975, over 47 years ago, he had a very strange encounter while camping out in California, and about 20 years later, he was in Monterey, California, and he was telling me about this UFO he had seen, him and his daughter, and so I asked him to share that with us tonight. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com, and if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Mike to the show. Mike, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Wes. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here.
The honor is mine to have you on, Mike, for sure. If you would, take us back to 1975 and kind of walk us into this encounter. What were you doing and what happened?
All right. Well, thank you, Wes. At the time, I was living in Butte County, California, in an area along the Feather River. My town's called Berry Creek. Unfortunately, Berry Creek burned in one of our terrible California fires a couple of years ago. Whole place gone. And the landscape has changed much. I haven't been back to visit, but that's where I kind of grew up. And in the mid-'70s, I was in my 20s. I worked a different series of jobs throughout my life there. I worked agriculture. I worked timber industry jobs. One of the summer jobs I had was for the Teamsters Union in a warehouse. And it was a fruit warehouse. Sacramento Valley is a big food producer. And I had a great job, union pay and benefits. I would work a seasonal shift every summer, get laid off, collect unemployment for a few months in the winter, and then get called back for work next year. So I had a swing shift position. I'd show up for work at around 2 in the afternoon and clock out at, 10 or 11 at night. And my cabin was 35, 40 miles from town up in the mountains. And frequently I wouldn't want to drive home all the way. So I would drive just a few miles outside of Oroville, California, along a stretch of what I think is the middle fork of the Feather River, paved road leading out to a dirt road that I could drive off of that paved road to a secluded clearing and be invisible to passerby. There was enough room for me to pull my old truck down to that clearing park level and get turned around in the morning and drive out. But that was it. It was just a small circular clearing surrounded on, with the exception of the road entry side of the clearing, the other three sides were just all brush, thick manzanita, digger pines, poison oak, berries, just very thick. The area hadn't burned in many, many decades, so the undergrowth was very impassively thick. And full moon night when I was there, if not full, it was very full, good night illumination. It was warm summer night in the Sacramento Valley. I had a pickup truck with a cozy mattress and some, pillows and a sleeping bag in the back, and that was my bed. No camper shell or anything. I'd just lay out under the stars after my work shift and crash out in the woods there. Wake up in the morning, go for a run, jump in the river. It was a good plan for me. One night in particular, the night of this encounter, I'd gotten to my spot. I had opened up my sleeping bag, laid down, was just laying in my bed, getting sleepy enough to fall asleep, and I heard the sound of voices from maybe a mile away, and it sounded like several people reveling in the night, shouting, yelling, laughing, hooping it up. And I didn't think anything of it when I initially heard it, but within, 5 or 10 seconds, it changed. The tone, the sounds, and the proximity to me changed. It was closer. The sounds and voices that I was hearing were coming closer to me, and it didn't sound right. There was just something odd about these voices, or the vocal inflections within the voices. It just was odd. I couldn't tell if I was listening to a man yelling or shouting, or a woman screaming, or a baby crying. It was just kind of all jumbled up together. And it was also in motion, making a beeline straight for me from across 3/4 to a mile distance, with no road or trails that I was aware of. It was just coming straight through the brush, and I could hear it breaking the brush as it made its approach towards me. This whole incident, as I'm describing it, is unfolding over just a few seconds. I mean, I'm not listening to this for minutes. This is like, whoa, I hear voices, and then I hear an unusual quality to the voices, and then I notice that the voices or the sounds I'm hearing are approaching, and then I sat up. And I listened to the sound of what sounded like an elephant crashing through the brush, and really loud screaming and shouting that I couldn't determine its source. It didn't sound like a coyote. I've heard him. It didn't sound like a cougar. Heard it. Didn't sound like a fox or any of the animals which can make, if you don't know what a fox sounds like at night, it can sound like a woman screaming. I've been living in the mountains long enough to be familiar with a lot of different wildlife sounds, and this didn't fit into any category. And then it was just right at me. I just crashed through the trees, and boom, it was at my camp, right on me. I mean, right there at the truck. And I hunkered down in the back of the truck and covered up under my sleeping bag. I was unarmed. I vulnerable. I felt extremely vulnerable, and I smelled this awful smell concurrent with its arrival in my sector, a stench of urine, rotten eggs, decomposing flesh, carrion, urine. It's just an amalgam of nauseating, acrid smells. And I noted that. I noted my own fear. I remember this as if it happened yesterday. Really, it's very fresh as I'm recalling it. I was afraid that this thing was going to hear my heart pounding in my chest and just destroy me. Not knowing what was really there, I could just hear it, and I could sense its stature. It sounded really big, Wes. I mean, it was making a lot of noise as it moved around. And then for as far as I could tell, it vaulted right over the back of my truck. It went right over the top of me and landed on the other side of my pickup from where it launched itself, came down with a a palpable thud. I mean, it shook the truck, when it came down. And that was it. I sat up. I was terrified. I was going to make a run for it or, try to, do something because I just couldn't lay there anymore. And I saw from about 50 to 75 yards away a dark shape moving away from me into the tree line and making a pathway and almost a tunnel through the brush as it left. And it was screaming the whole time. And then it was gone. Or at least moving away from me, I heard that sound of it crashing, shouting, screaming, and chattering until it was in the distance, maybe another half a mile away. And then I got in my truck and drove away. My only glimpse of the thing was like I described. I saw something crashing through the brush under the moonlight, 50 to 75 yards away. I just saw a dark shape. I didn't think it was a Bigfoot. I didn't know what it was. I really didn't think much about Bigfoot at that time in my life. I was, involved with other things, and it wasn't anything that popped into my mind. I noted this internally, took my notes in my own head on this, so to speak, as just an anomalous thing. I really didn't ever know what it was. And I put it in a file inside myself. I shared the experience with some other people over the years. Really wasn't until I started listening to your podcast that I put this whole thing together, and then I'm listening to other accounts from other people because there seemed to be a lot of folks willing to come out and talk about their experiences. And I believed that what I encountered that night was a Sasquatch, based on sound recordings that I've heard on your podcast from Jim Sherman and that other fellow, can't recall his name. There's a couple of guys who were making audio recordings that, I listened to some of these things and they are chillingly familiar to what I heard.
Yeah, what a scary encounter, especially it jumping over the truck. I was curious, the Ron Moorhead, the Sierra sounds. Here, I got a little bit of it.
Right there, I just see moving right through there.
Yes, Ron Moorhead Sierra sounds were chilling to me. Okay, the chatter sounds, the talking sounds, the shouting, the screaming off in the distance that sounds like an air raid siren, and the aggressive yelling where you just, I could feel it in my body. Really, I've heard your listeners and the people sharing on your show about infrasound effects in their bodies and how it kind of shuts them down. And you can actually physically feel these resonant frequencies from this source. If it's an animal or, whatever it is, it's real. I certainly can agree with your other callers and people who've shared with you that I know what they're talking about.
Yeah, what a scary night, especially since we're going back, to 1975. I don't know what the conversation was like back then regarding Sasquatch. Do you think the creature was, do you think there was more than one?
Yeah, I do, because of the fact of the multiple voices. Maybe one of these things can make all those sounds together. But when I first heard it, I really got the impression that there were several people on that ridge that distance away. So I can only theorize or surmise based on how it sounded. Yeah, I didn't think I got the impression that there was only one thing in my camp. Okay. I didn't think that I was surrounded by multiple creatures. I thought, and again, I didn't see, but I had the impression that there was something, singular thing there. But in retrospect, that amalgam of sounds and voices together doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I would imagine, especially hearing the vocalizations. You even talked about the air raid siren, which a lot of us kind of relate that to the Ohio howl. I want to ask you, when when it walked into your camp, was it right next to you there while you were in the truck?
It didn't walk up, it ran up, and it must have been moving really, really super fast because the elapsed time from, okay, let's be conservative and say it was only 3/4 of a mile away to my truck was, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds through the brush. It doesn't seem possible.
Yeah, the way these things are reported to move, how fast they move, the way they move, it seems very unnatural to me. I'm really trying to put myself in your shoes in this moment. And what a moment of vulnerability. I mean, you're in the back of a truck, kind of at the, you're not armed, you're kind of at this thing's mercy. What do you make of that behavior of it jumping over the truck?
A display of aggression, a display. I think it was for me, I mean, I'd do that kind of a thing if I was really trying to impress or frighten somebody, you know? Why? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I didn't see it do that. I just remember thinking, oh my God, it just flew right over me. I could hear the whoosh of it and it's land. I could hear it come down. It was like thud, vibrational thud onto the ground.
Yeah, I've heard of them jumping over trucks. I've also had a recent encounter of one that pushed a truck. It was a roadside crossing. It's very strange behavior. I mean, do you get the impression, I know that you don't know and I don't know, but do you think that this creature knew you were there?
I think it was trying to scare me off. Okay. I was in fear for my life, but it didn't kill me, And if I wanted to scare somebody off and I had the ability to cover a 3/4 of a mile in 20 seconds and scare the crap out of somebody with my voice, yeah, it's an option. It's an option. Based on other research and studies that I've done into this phenomena, I think some of them are killers, and people disappearing off trails. And, the amount of people that disappear in the national forest doesn't make sense either. Where's everybody going? And how come you can't find a trace?
Yeah, I do think that some of them are absolute killers and have killed before. And there's accounts I can point to justify that. But I think most of their behavior, generally speaking, most of their behavior is meant to terrify you. It's meant to make you go away, kind of like a bluff. And most of my opinion is formed from eyewitness testimony. I do think that they bluff a lot. They try to make you go away. And I think the type of encounter that you had when you're by yourself, you'll have a different type of encounter when you're by yourself than if you're in that campsite and there was 4 or 5 other guys or 4 or 5 other people in that campsite. I think you'd have a very different encounter.
Right. But then there's those stories, like that surveyor in Maine, I think it was, one of David Paulides' cases, where there's 4 surveyors walking 50 feet apart into a wooded area. And the last guy in this line of survey personnel, he's talking to the person ahead of him. They're kind of just chatting. And then all of a sudden, he's not there. And, massive manhunt. They find a shoe and some pocket change, like a half a mile away. That's it. Something snatched that guy, dragged him off into the woods silently. How? Something that moved as fast as what I heard could get away with that. And other eyewitness descriptions of their encounters, these things can be 10 feet away from you, staring at you, and you don't even know it until it stands up. What's up with that?
Yeah.
And then there's the anomalous ones who people report, well, I followed it or its tracks until this certain point, and then it seemed like it just disappeared into thin air, and the track stopped simultaneously at the same spot. I mean, that's kind of a bag of crazy too, but it happens.
Yeah, you bring up a good argument, Mike. I mean, there is a lot of really weird things that go on with these encounters with Sasquatch. And I interviewed one of the crew members on that job site you were just talking about. And it's very much how you describe it. I mean, they walk 50 feet away from each other, kind of in a line, and they look back and he was gone. It's very strange. Where this happened to you, did you ever go back to this location?
Yes. Shortly after this encounter, I purchased a firearm, big shotgun with some rifled slugs and double-aught buckshot, and I went back, and with the intention of recreating the encounter or revisiting with whatever happened and trying to see if it happened again or if I could determine what the heck it was. So I go back out there after work one night, armed, and I stayed up. I heard it, Wes, from a distance much further than my initial encounter. I could hear it miles away. It was a Sierra sound. It was the air raid siren, man. Just crazy. Couldn't smell anything. Like I say, it didn't approach this time. It was far away. And that's my only other, Bigfoot data that I got. I never had a repeat experience, anything like that first time, but I did hear it off in the distance. Same area. And interestingly enough, flash forward many, many years, I raised my own family in the Santa Cruz, Monterey Bay area here in California. And in the Santa Cruz Mountains, which is a redwood forested area, near Felton, California, there's a Bigfoot museum and research center right on Highway 9. There was a guy in there, his name was Mike, I believe, and he'd been there for years. I had never been to the Bigfoot Museum. I remember driving past it with my wife and kids and stuff, but we never stopped. And so here a few years ago, I'm newly widowed and traveling through that mountain area. I just pulled in on a whim to the Bigfoot Museum, and I met the proprietor. And I took a look around. He's got a lot of newspaper articles and, Bigfoot stuff. I think he's BFRO guy. My Kung Fu instructor worked with him, and they were actually doing Bigfoot tours at night in the Santa Cruz Mountains, night watches with night vision and parabolic antennas and what have you. And I stopped in, just to see what was up in there. And I looked on the wall of his little museum, and there's a big map of the Western United States with push pins, these little red push pins, like, if you were, planning a city improvement or something, and you had a big board with a map of the city on it and push pins to indicate locations of something. Well, they had push pins on here where there were hotspots and sighting reports. That area where I had my sighting in the 70s is actually a hotspot, according to this guy's map. I don't know what you've gotten out of Butte County or Feather River in your experience, talking to all of us, but there was a lot of hits in the Feather River Canyon. And I believe it. There's a lot of wilderness up there. Unfortunately, in the last some years, a lot of it's burned. Like millions of acres are just, gone now, and it breaks my heart. Anyway, yeah, hotspot, according to a map I saw with indicator pins at this Bigfoot Research Museum.
Yeah, even to this day, I get a lot of encounters from there. I mean, especially, Lake Oroville over there. I've had a lot of encounters around that spot. It definitely is a hot area. Going back to it jumping over your truck, I don't know anything that could really jump over a truck, especially when it's right there. It's not really getting a running start, it's just hopping. I mean, nothing can really jump over a truck. I know I couldn't.
We're talking about a 57 Chevy pickup, short bed, no racks on it, no camper shell. I guess an 8-foot Sasquatch would have little trouble hopping over that thing. Look, I think it's possible. But again, I didn't see anything. So it was just a sensory impression I got, hearing it, feeling it, that kind of a reaction, or that kind of an impression, I would say.
Yeah, I guess I should have clarified. Nothing known to science could jump over it like that. I mean, obviously, I do think you ran into a Sasquatch. The vocals that you mentioned, the behavior. I wanted to ask you, when you sat up in the truck and you were looking in the direction of this thing, I realize it's late at night and it's dark and you're catching a glimpse of it. Was there any details that you remember? I know it's hard.
It's really hard, and I'm just going to say big, okay, 50 to 75 yards away, in the canopied, moonlit shadows of that area. It would have been impossible for me, even if I'd been less frightened to get more of a visual read on it because it was just too far away and it was moving too quick. Black shadow making its way away from me, yelling and screaming, 7 feet, 8 feet tall. I don't know, 10 feet tall. It was big, you know?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you later on what your opinion as far as what Sasquatch is, and I'm very curious to hear your answer, but we're going back 47 years ago, and I know you're 67 years young. The Mike back in 1975 and the Mike now, I'm curious how your opinion has changed, but back in 1975, what did you think you were running into?
Well, my life has had a number of interesting to the point of anomalous, experiences. So my mindset in the mid 70s was I was kind of like a refugee from the big city. As a child, I lived in Los Angeles and I hated it. I felt like I was just trapped in a prison industrial complex there and kind of a bullied intellectual kid, when I was a youngster. And I really didn't like growing up there. A classic dysfunctional, broken home. Mother and father weren't well. My sister and I were always kind of like scared of everything and kind of making our own way. So when I finally got out of LA, and I wasn't even out of high school, I dropped out of high school to leave LA and my home, just to get away. I had to get out. I landed in the Sierras, and really, that's where I kind of would say I grew up. I didn't grow up as a child in LA. I was stunted by LA as a child. But I grew up in the mountains. And my mindset was connection to the earth. I wanted to be close to Mother Nature. I wanted to, be a part of this beautiful community that I had kind of fallen into. I was learning how to work, learning how to be a young man, a responsible person in the world, and do things, I've always been kind of a spiritually bent person. I kind of like to look behind things, what's behind it, look through a different lens at the world and the things that I see. And that's kind of where my head was at. I'd had other encounters that I described as anomalous. And I know that on your show, you frequently ask people if they see strange lights or if they've had anything unusual happen on properties or around properties where they've had Sasquatch encounters. And, there was nothing like one of those orbs or anything that happened during my encounter, Wes. But I know when we spoke initially the other day, in my initial email to you, I mentioned that I'd had other what's called them paranormal experiences. That I know that your program and what you do, you cover a lot of bases, and it can include UFOs, orbs, mythologies or ancient texts or whatever. And I think these things are all inter and cross connected. These paranormal events. UFO sightings, orb sightings, ghost sightings, visions of St. Mary, or, people report seeing things. And I think that it matters. I think that, and one of the ways that I have much respect for you is in your willingness to listen and trust the witness. It takes some pretty big balls, let's say, to come out and tell the truth that historically, we know that if we come up with certain of these stories and truths that we would like to tell, there's a stigma attached. And if you tell your truth, unfortunately, in this crazy world, you will be labeled as mentally ill, unstable, on drugs. We use the example of military personnel who were finally encouraged to come out about their UFO or UAP sightings. That just happened. Pilots have been reporting or seeing anomalous aircraft for decades. But the standard operating protocol, if you're an airline pilot and you report this, you lose your job. If you're military personnel and you report this, you lose your job. You lose your credibility too. They can ruin you for life. Once you get that handle on you, you're labeled and compartmentalized as a kook for what you've been willing to talk about truthfully kind of ruins people for their lives, And I felt compelled to not speak about a lot of things that have happened to me for fear of that stigma. And then some of this, I kind of reach a certain point where I'm like, okay, wait a second, this really happened. And I know what I saw, and I'm going to talk about it. And, truth be told, and, screw all else. I'm just going to say it. And I did. I started speaking my truth. A lot of people have heard the Bigfoot story. A lot of people have heard some of my UFO encounters too, I kind of put that out there. And, anyone who was questions and asked the question, well, what happened? I'll tell them. And then you can do with whatever I say as you wish or as you will. It's kind of like up to the listener to decide what they want to do with my story. I don't really care. I would hope that it would be perhaps for some an affirmation, that they resonate with something that occurred in their own lives and they can seek some peace or solace in knowing that, wow, I'm not alone. This guy also had the same thing happen. I share for that reason, a lot. I'm hoping that our collective experience and the connective tissue between humans, matters enough so that we listen and trust each other and that we learn from our experiences about this world we're living in and our station in it. What are we supposed to be doing here? And what do these experiences mean? Those are all things that I think about a lot.
Yeah, I respect your answer a lot, Mike. That was very cool of you to say that. It's very cool insight. If you would tell me, I know when we were talking before, you talked about the lights and a UFO incident. Tell me about the lights. I mean, kind of when did this happen and what happened?
Okay, well, I have personally never seen the golf ball or baseball to basketball size orbs that people report around Sasquatch sightings. I've never seen that. However, I've seen anomalous lights in the sky. I've seen anomalous aircraft in the sky. I'm a pretty pragmatic guy, Wes. I've done a lot of things that require cognitive thought, reasonable and rational analysis of things. I've done this in academia. I've done this in construction. I've done this as a dad. We got to think about a lot of things in this world. And yeah, this is a multiple witness, multiple craft sighting in Monterey, many years after my Bigfoot sighting. Now, my oldest daughter and I, mid-90s, she was 16 years old. She's 40 now, but she was 16 at the time. And Lynn and I had, we kind of fast-tracking all of our kids through school. We would pull them out of public school, homeschool them until they got their high school equivalency, and then they go to college at like 16. So this daughter was attending Monterey Peninsula College, getting her AA degree at 16. One of her classes was a photography class, and one of the assignments was to use an old school 35 millimeter single reflex camera and high-speed film, black and white, at night, just using ambient illumination for the exposures. And my kid's idea was to go into an old cemetery in downtown Monterey and take pictures under the full moon of some cemetery features like gravestones and big marble monoliths that were in this cemetery, and catch them with, moon shadow and tree shadows under the spooky full moon. The assignment was right prior to Halloween. It was a good assignment. The teacher says, hey, go take out your camera at night, load it up with 1,000 speed film, and take spooky photos with kind of like a Halloween genre theme. So her idea was to go to the cemetery. As she was only 16, I'm not going to let her go out there alone at night. I go with her as dad. She sets up a tripod. She's got her camera set up. She's taking some great shots. It's about 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, downtown Monterey, late October, Indian summer night. I'm just standing there. I'm having a cigarette. I'm looking at the night sky. She's doing her work, taking her pictures, and I see a shooting star, or what looked like a meteorite, coming in over Carmel Hill from the south heading north. I got a visual look at it, a good bead on it with my eyes, and I watched it streak across the night sky just like a shooting star, a meteorite, with a tip corona trail behind it. Only thing is as this meteor began to arc out and phase out, two orange spherical objects discharged from the very tip of the front of this object that was streaking at a high rate of speed across the sky like a meteorite. Two spheres. They were several thousand feet up. They flew right in front of us and over the campus of the college across the street from the cemetery where we stood. That was the college where actually I was an instructor there. My whole family took classes there, and I worked there for a few semesters as an instructor. Anyway, college is there. There's the cemetery, and we're downtown Monterey. The cemetery is an entire city block. It's big, but there's a boulevard on one side and a boulevard on the other, and there's a park with guys playing softball at night right next to the cemetery. And these two orange objects just kind of floated up in the sky. They went in northerly direction towards Seaside, California, from where we stood in Monterey. They were heading north. I could see them in spin rotation. They were close to each other, maybe 100 feet apart at that altitude by my estimation. And they were in spin rotation, random. They weren't turning like baseballs. The rotation was odd. It was just all directions as they spun, but they were moving northward. And then we watched them for, I don't know, half a minute. I asked her to try to take pictures of them, and she did. I was captivated. I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then they disappeared. They just went into nowhere. There was no clouds that night. It was a clear sky. They just disappeared, like somebody turned out the lights. So she goes back to taking pictures. I'm kind of accelerated now and thinking, wow, that was pretty awesome. And I'm looking at the night sky again, and there was a baseball field adjacent to this cemetery. There was a night game going on. Some guys out there hitting the softball around and having a few beers, and it looked like fun over there. But I'm looking in that direction about a minute after these two orange spherical objects disappeared right in front of our eyes, when right over the ball field, which was illuminated by big overhead Klieg lights, field lights, I would say at 300 feet over the ball field, which was from where we stood, maybe, 500 yards away, a couple football fields away from us, two orange spherical objects just appeared out of nowhere. As I was looking in that direction, they just came on, like somebody turned on a light switch. Only this time they weren't, a couple thousand feet up and away from us. It was right overhead. And they floated over the baseball diamond towards us. And these two spherical objects, this time just a couple hundred feet overhead, they went right overhead. I was actually signaling with the mag light that I was holding, this flashlight. And I'm kind of muttering to myself, I see you. This is really happening. They're right there. And I watch these things go from west to east now, towards that college campus, right across the street from where we stood. And they disappeared, not into a cloud bank. They didn't zip away. They just went away. They just gone, poof. So I'm really hyper accelerated now. I'm thinking this is bizarre. After those two, the secondary part of the sighting disappeared, the two that appeared over the baseball diamond and floated right overhead, low altitude over us. When those things phased out or, went away, I began scanning the sky again. I turned my body and my position was looking again towards that ball field, but I, for some reason, was looking through the trees out on the water of Monterey Bay, which we were only like a tenth of a mile away from Fisherman's Wharf and the Wharf Number 2 beach and all that stuff. If anyone's familiar with Monterey, there's a Fisherman's Wharf tourist area, and then there's the ocean and the beaches, and you could see the moonlight from the full moon cast on the ocean. And it went out towards the horizon, this impression, this light impression, reflection on the water of the Pacific there. out towards the horizon. And I had noticed that shimmer of moonlight on the sea. And then at the horizon, I noticed a really bright light come on right in front of me. And it was offshore. It was past the trees, past the park, past the beach, and then out over the water. I'm guessing out near the horizon line, maybe 10 miles offshore. This really bright light just comes on. And then another one about a second later. If you were in your mind's eye, imagine you're looking out over the ocean, and right straight in front of you at the horizon, a light comes on, and then 25, 30 degrees to the right, a second later, another light, identical to the first one, just comes on, and then 20 or 30 degrees to the left, a third light comes on. So I'm looking at three really, really bright, white, bizarre-looking lights, low on the horizon, miles offshore, taking up between the three of them and the space between those individual three, a pretty good chunk, mathematically, of the horizon, you know? I mean, I can see 180 degrees in front of me. From peripheral edge to peripheral edge, left to right, that's 180. So, you know, a third of that is covered by either three objects coming in towards me. I can see these lights are getting bigger, fast, growing fast. I get the impression they are approaching shore. And I said to my daughter, I said, whoa, here's what I said, Wes, here comes the cavalry. Because in my mind, I had thought I'm looking at three conventional aircraft approach lights, and this was a scramble of F-16s or Cobra helicopters, something really fast from Vandenberg, maybe, to investigate these UFOs we've been watching for minutes. That was my first thought. And I said, okay, here comes the cavalry. Within a ridiculously short amount of time, those three lights were at the beach. They'd come all those miles across the water. They were right there at the beach, at Del Monte Beach, 1/10 of a mile away from where we stood. And then I watched them swoop up. They arced up from just right above the water to an incline, and then they passed overhead. And I looked up in absolute shock, and I was frightened because it wasn't three jets or three helicopters with a conventional approach light. This was one aircraft. It was triangular. It was black. I'm going to say black, but I'll get back to that in a minute. And there was a bizarre looking illumination point at each corner of this perfectly shaped, equilaterally, triangularly shaped aircraft. It didn't make a sound, but there was a static thrum from it. I could feel it as it flew overhead. And I don't think I heard it, but I could sense almost like a buzzing in my body from it. And I pulled my daughter into me like a duck in cover. She's under my armpit, but I'm looking up. It covered the sky over downtown Monterey at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. Traffic and passerby and, people walking on the wharf and guys playing softball. This thing came over all of us and blocked out the night sky for a brief moment. The color was wrong. I say black. I don't have, I work with words a lot. I can articulate what I think and what I'm seeing. I don't have a description that fits any of my language for the color that this thing was. It didn't appear to have a solid mass, even though the definition of the triangular shape was clearly imprinted across the field of vision of the sky. I mean, it was a triangle. But the color and the way that the body of this thing looked was like, I don't know, man. If you were to imagine in your mind's eye what a black hole looks like, that's the impression that I got. And it felt wrong. I just thought, oh, this is just wrong. It's too big. And by the way, after it passed over us, it just disappeared. It got about to the point in the sky at maybe 600 or 700 feet altitude as it was arcing up and away from us. And then it vanished. It was just gone. She and I both saw that. She was watching when it flew over and disappeared. We grabbed the camera, and I dragged her and the camera to the car, and we drove out of there. I was disturbed. I was frightened. I wanted to go and report this to the police. And my daughter's like, "What are you going to say, Dad? What are you going to tell the police that we just saw?" And she was right. Because I did go to Monterey Police Station first, and I was, God, I must have looked like a freaking lunatic, Wes. You know, the police looked at me like, looking in my eyes to see if I was on drugs, looking at my daughter to see if she was okay with this guy that appeared to be unhinged. It was humiliating. I went straight home. I didn't say anything to my wife or my other daughters. I mumbled something about flying saucers, went upstairs in our house. We had an upstairs bedroom, Lynn and I, with a window that you could take the screen out and you could step on the lower roof level and be up on the upper roof outside of our bedroom of our 2-story home. Kicked out the screen. I grabbed a portable phone. I went up on the roof and I started making calls. I called Monterey Airport. This is now about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. I called the tower. I could see the tower lights from Monterey Airport and the runway lights flashing. The airport's only like, as the crow flies, like 10 miles from our house. So I said, well, the air traffic controllers must have seen this. And I called, and someone answered. And actually, I said, I need to talk with an air traffic controller, please. And whoever answered the phone patched me through. Guy picks up the phone and he goes, "Hi, tower, how can I help you?" And I said, well, I live about 10 miles away. I'm looking up at the sky. "Say, man, did you see anything weird about 30 or 40 minutes ago? Radar or visual?" And he goes, "No, what's up?" And I told him what I saw. And he goes, "Oh, wow, that sounds like a UFO. Here, I got a phone number for you." I'm not making this up, Wes. He's got a phone number in the tower of Peter Davenport. Peter Davenport's been running a database since the 70s. He's a UFO investigator. He runs Newfork, the new UFO reporting center. I had never heard of him. I wasn't talking about UFOs much or studying this or anything like that time. I called the number, and it's now like 10 o'clock at night, and the guy answered the phone. He goes, "Peter Davenport, how can I help?" And I said, "Well, I got your phone number from an air traffic controller in Monterey. I think I just had a sighting." And he took my information and recounted what I had seen with Sasha, and he goes, "Oh, that's classic." He told me, this is in 1996, Wes. Peter Davenport tells me, "Oh, yeah, in the previous 12 months prior to your call, Mr. Heller, he'd gotten about 1,200 reports from the western United States and the eastern coast of Australia, interestingly enough, because he's international, of reports of what people were describing as enormous, humongous, frighteningly large triangles, accompanied by smaller spherical craft. The same type of sighting that I had just had. He's been getting hundreds of them for months. The year after that, 1997, there was a wave in Belgium of black triangular UFOs with lights on each corner that were photographed by people. You know, you can look that one up. Some of those photos are on YouTube.
Yeah, that's an amazing account, Mike. And, I've talked to eyewitnesses before that have seen this sort of craft, and they'll do this sort of thing, much like what you just did. They'll go, well, it was black. And then they'll stop and go, let me back up. And a lot of eyewitnesses will describe it, like a black hole, like it just sucked everything, all of the light and everything into it. And if you look up and you're underneath it, you'll think it's just a really, really dark night.
Yes, but there was a quality of three-dimensional depth to it, which really just disturbed me. I couldn't wrap my brain around it, And yeah, like I was saying, you know, I just don't have a lot of language to describe some of these things.
I can't even imagine the feeling. I would think terror would come to mind as a way to describe it. How did this kind of affect your life afterwards?
I became a joke in my family. You know, like if you like to fish, everybody's going to give you fishing tackle on Christmas and birthday, right? I started getting UFO gag gifts from the Roswell Museum, or just, you know, UFO shot glasses, inflatable alien dolls, all this, you know. My daughter was like, you know, I've always known these things are real. Why are you so freaked out about it, Dad? You know, my family thought I was going bonkers for a while. I mean, really, I was obsessed with this. I kind of compared myself with the character of Richard Dreyfuss in Steven Spielberg's great movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I mean, I felt like that character, that protagonist who basically becomes unhinged after he, working as a lineman, has an encounter with a UFO. Great film. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend it. I consider a lot of these works to be actual, you know, they're not entertainment to me. This is documentary. This is documentation. And it's just presented in a digestible form for people, you know. But yeah, pretty weird, huh?
No, I don't think it's weird at all. I think, you know, back in 1996, it might have been weird, but there's so many videos, there's so many eyewitness testimony. They're out there. I have no doubt you saw what you saw, and many people have seen what you've seen, and I can see it overtaking you, you know, becoming kind of overtaking your life, trying to find an answer for this. You and I were talking earlier, and when we were talking, you had mentioned all of these things are connected. I'm curious what you meant by that.
As I started out my conversation with you, I think that the interconnective tissues between these paranormal events, and I'm going to put air quotations on paranormal, because I'm going to theorize, Wes, that the paranormal is actually the normal. We're just not supposed to know that. And I think that there's an agenda in keeping that truth from us. And I think that these paranormal experiences that people have, like UFOs, Sasquatch, ghosts, apports, orbs, all these things that we talk about, you know, in our chat rooms or our conversations with loved ones or like-minded souls, I think that it's all the same phenomena, really.
Yeah, I know that you and I were talking off the air about Sasquatch and, you know, a lot of the weird things that go on with Sasquatch, things that people can't really explain. And when they can't explain it, they ignore it. You know, it's probably some crazy guy talking about it. But, you know, there's a lot of really weird things with Sasquatch, like eyes glowing, that gets reported a lot. And people are very consistent when they talk about it. And just some of the weird things with Sasquatch, no one can really explain. And for some weird reason, no one can seem to catch up with them too, which I find very odd. I wanted to ask you, do you think Sasquatch is physical?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I can only answer it by saying when they're here and we see them and photograph them or hear them or feed them and they take the food, that's physical. That's a physical flesh and blood creature. You know, Sasquatch sounds to me like a great ape or some type of a cross connect, you know. But then there's these mysteries, these X factors, the unknowns. How come we can only determine the source of the mitochondrial DNA to a human female, and then the male, the daddy side? Where's the dad? What is the dad? Question mark. So I believe that when we see them, it's as physical as the chair you're sitting on. And when we don't see them, they may still be as physical as the chair, but we just don't see it because we don't know how. And that's planned too. We've been blinded and hobbled, you know, by bad education, bad everything. You know, we're just taught the wrong stuff and told not to look in the direction where there was truth so that we could make somebody some more money, maybe, you know. I mean, that's what it looks like to me. We all want truth. We all want to be satisfied in our own pursuits of joy and fulfillment. But a lot of us don't ever seem to get there because we're too busy running the hamster wheel. I believe that's by design too. So I think that Sasquatch is a physical creature when it appears in the physical form. I've got to stop there because of the anomalies in this phenomena that we've touched on in this conversation, and you touch on in almost every conversation. Where do they go when the tracks stop? How come they disappear in a flash of light? How come they appear with a flash of light? That doesn't answer any of the scientific, rational, and logical questions that rational, scientific, and logical people are going to come up with.
I've really enjoyed your insight on everything, Mike, and just kind of your take on what's going on in this world. And you bring up a lot of really good points that make me stop and think. Even the mitochondrial DNA. Dr. Ketchum did that whole DNA thing, and Dr. Ketchum and I have actually become pretty good friends off the air. I actually really, really like her. And she does a really good job at explaining DNA. And I need to really have her on from a scientific point of view to kind of break that down. But I've enjoyed chatting with you, Mike. I mean, going from your Bigfoot encounter 40 some odd years ago to this UFO encounter, which blows my mind. I've enjoyed chatting with you. It's been an honor to have you on the show.
It's all mine, Wes. And I bow and salute you, your work, and your outreach to all of us, giving us a voice, sharing your voice with us. You know, it's huge. And, yeah, man. Love you. Thank you, Wes. You know, keep it up, man. It's beautiful to watch, listen, and see how this whole craziness unfolds. And the work that you do with other people who are brave enough, you know, to actually put yourselves out there on the internet, you know, and it's huge to me. And I thank you, okay?
Thanks so much, Mike. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Until next time, everyone.